All right, well, it is 12 o'clock, so I'd like to say thank you for everyone who is joining us today for our lunchtime bite session. We are very lucky to be joined by the very talented interior design and styling expert Louise on picture here. She will be running us through some current trends for your new home. We'll be looking at some, how to choose the perfect colors for our new home and some tips and tricks on styling your home on a budget. Hello, Louise. How are you today?
I'm great. Hi, everybody. Fun to be here to talk about this great topic.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. So let's get right into it. I'd like to hear some current trends that are easy to replicate in your new home.
Well, at the moment, everybody's mad for greenery, and particularly seeing we're home all the time now. We're home so much more than we ever used to be. Putting greenery into the house is super hot right now for all the good reasons. You can nurture the product, makes it feel a little bit more homely. And the advantages of plants is where you're putting oxygen into your space, which can only do good things. It's great. And bathrooms naturally are always hot to trot because there's a lot of self-care and nurturing that we're trying to focus on while we're all in this kind of unprecedented time. So bathrooms, greenery and art walls would be my 3 tips for getting things done in your home.
Oh, wonderful. I do have a few more questions. So my next one is, and I actually found this very hard for when I built my first home. How do I pick the right paint colors for my new house?
Yeah, it can be daunting, I guess.
And stressful.
I'm a big believer in keeping everything white so that the walls become recessive and then it lets the other things bounce around in the space and have a little bit more authority. If that feels a bit too bland, sometimes it's great to just whack a bold colour on a wall. So I think that's when people start getting a little daunted and intimidated because there's 1,000 options. But the first thing to remember is if it's a disaster, you just paint over it. So you really can't back yourself into a corner where it's just unlivable with. You just change it again. So if you're not feeling quite so bold, go with just perhaps a subtle shade of the white. So you could go for any of the neutral tones from sand colours or seashell, kind of ecru and eggshell. Or if you're just really feeling confident but just can't quite surrender to an entire wall of a colour, I'm thinking that you could just do a strip of bold colour through things so that perhaps it's at the height that cuts through the windows, or perhaps it sits just at the top of your sofa, depending on the room you're doing. But play around with putting some geometrical colours onto the wall rather than perhaps just the entire wall.
That's such a good idea. I never thought of that because I do have feature walls in my house and I always just assumed that it just needed to be a one all bold colour on each wall.
Sometimes you're just adding these stripes either horizontally or vertically. It's a very inexpensive way to get a great look because you're not having to fill that wall with any artwork or any giant expensive light fittings to go across it, but you are really going to pack a punch with it, with the middle third or vertically, maybe tweak a little bit up onto the ceiling if you're feeling a little bit outrageous, those things like that. But you can be playful with paint because, as I say, if you feel that you've committed correctly, you can just paint it over.
That's right. It's not permanent.
It's not permanent. And as you were saying before, is choosing the colours a little bit kind of nerve-wracking. And a good thing to do is to do a little test patch because the colour that you choose will have a different impact at any time of the day. You know, as the light moves through the rooms, depending which way your windows face, you'll get a different impact from where it's going to be quite vivid to perhaps more dusky and a bit more subdued and implied tones as the sun's setting.
Oh, very good. All right, off to the next question. I want to know, and I'm sure everybody else wants to know, what is the best way to furnish an open plan space? Because a lot of builders at the moment have very open space floor plans. So how do we address that?
Well, they're wonderful because they do create a big heartbeat of the home. So an open space is lovely. But if you're wanting to create a little bit more intimacy within that space so that you don't feel like you're bouncing around inside an airport hangar. I think that it's good to set up some informal barriers. So you can use things like a giant cluster of plants or a green wall, so that you're just putting a little marking in between the two spaces. And these are great because they're not going to close the space off, but they're just going to give an implied vision of something else. There's nothing more sort of exciting than a sneak peek of something around a room. So if you've got something in front of you, you are desiring to kind of look behind it and work out the space behind it. So greenery is a great thing. Any kind of screen is a great idea as well, because you're not going to put it floor to ceiling. So a bifold or a trifold screen can be made of, there's wicker options, or felt options are great too, because they can improve acoustics as well. So if you are in this big space that feels a bit noisy and rattly, using soft furnishings, so felt and things that are soft on a wall, turn it into a pinboard then as well. So it becomes kind of like a movable piece of art as well. And I think if we were talking about delineation and acoustics, another good way to focus on a space is to add a giant rug. And then that kind of just anchors that space and causes it to feel like it's a sort of a room within a room.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for those great tips. I do have another question. I sort of mentioned to you, I know, I'm sorry for all the questions. I could have a chat with you all day. Talk to me about blank walls. So I'm sure I can speak for many others that are joining in today. I have a lot of blank walls. What do I do with them?
I think go easy. It's a little bit combative to cover every space. Suddenly you can have a bit of a rush of blood and think, I've got to make my walls seem busy and show my personality and do everything all at once. But my first tip when trying to sort out blank walls is just leave 3 bare and make 1 really full and busy. It's a nice way to start. Then you can sense if it's just too pervading into the space. So, I mean, Ada, when you're sitting in a space and you're looking around, you can be distracted by things. So it's a very good idea to work with a positive and a negative, so that your eye's got a bit of a break, and then it can take in the next design feature fresh. So if I'm talking about an art wall, a great way to do it is to imagine that you've got a handful of sand, and if you were to throw the sand and it's stuck to the wall, the way that it lands, there's a real naturalness to it. It ends up looking a little bit like a constellation. So it's quite impactful in the middle and then just trickles off to the side.
All right.
Like so many things with design, it's a great idea to kind of mimic nature in that way. Piles of things in the middle and then just easing off to the side. When you're doing the art wall, if you're deciding to go with that, the mass in the middle, it's probably an important tip not to put really fine detail pieces of art way above eye height. It's a little hard then to take in what the image actually is. So if you're going for very dainty little things, they should be probably spread to the side of your framing of your art wall, so that you can see exactly what it is. As you're going up higher above eye height, it's a little bit tricky to see all those fine detailed things. So you can do that. There's so many ways to do it. It's really just working out how it feels in the room. You can do a constellation where it's a burst in the middle. You could set it up vertically so that it's in 1/3 of the wall. You could do it all the way into a corner and then just let those pieces trickle onto the next side of the wall. You can individualise it depending on what the room is. If it's at a front entrance, you probably just would do something there, and maybe on the little return wall, it's always great too. And art walls don't necessarily just need to be framed. You can add a whole lot of eclectic things into the mix. So if you're trying to develop a little bit more personality to your space, as you were saying, Ada, you don't want it to just be an entire white box. So maybe you don't have a whole lot of art. So you could make it just a wall You can add framed scarves, you could add masks, clay pieces, you could add the Japanese paper washi tape, add some little squares and things into it. So you can make it a little bit more three-dimensional by putting a pot plant onto it or hanging that in front of it as well. Can then be 3D art and framed art all at once.
Oh, wow. I'm feeling so inspired today. I'm feeling absolutely.
It sounds exhausting, but once you get a bit of a flow on with an art wall, it's actually quite exciting. It's almost a visual diary of things that you're inspired by, places you've been to, colours that have a memory, all of those sorts of things. It's a really fun way to decorate it with your own personality.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, in terms of budget, if I was on a low budget, can you give me some tips and tricks on how to, I guess, especially coming to spring now, I'm sure a lot of us will start to observe our space and want to do maybe a bit of a spring clean or, put some additions into our space. So how do we go about doing that on a budget?
I think that if you're going to just start off, perhaps you're moving into the brand new house and you've decided not to bring any of your old pieces with you. You've decided that this is it and you're now a grown up and you're going to have a grown up house and not bring your futon with you and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah. Which we all do.
You end up just moving your clutter from one property to the next one until you suddenly say, this is my house. I want it to be reflective of who I am when I'm living here. I want it to be inviting, but I also want it to be filled with my own soulful things. So don't rush and just buy everything that you think to fill a space. A great idea is to prioritize your busy zone, your most favoured zone, which could be the kitchen. You may love to spend all your time cooking, so don't skimp on a couple of great knives or a couple of great beautiful boards that you can have out on display. If the living area is perhaps your most favourite place or the one that you think it's the most important zone to you and your family, buy one special piece. So buy something that you have always admired. Perhaps it's always been on your mood board, a particular chair or a piece of art that somebody painted that you'd seen years ago, and invest in that piece because it'll delight you every time you see it. And it's just a much better approach to it than just filling for filling's sake. And the other thing that we discussed, Ada, is working with scale. So one large piece in a zone has so much more impact than filling the place with tiny little bits and pieces which can end up being disrupted or broken or damaged. Make things that you almost think are too large for the area, because it then actually makes the space expansive. It's a great way to get some bang for your buck as well.
Good idea. Well, thank you so much for today. I would love to continue chatting with you, but I guess we have to wrap this up. I'd like to thank you and everybody else who attended today's webinar. We will be selecting one very lucky winner today to win a private virtual consultation with the lovely Louise today. That's valued at $600. Entries are closed now and the winner will be selected today at 1 p.m. So good luck to everybody. And for our next week's webinar, we will be having a chat about the role of a developments manager and what their roles involve. Also coming up, we will be having chats about landscaping tips and tricks and also working with different builders and selecting your perfect designs. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
If anybody would like to get in touch with us today to discuss anything about today's session or anything else, our email is melbourne@yourland.com. And for more tricks and tips from our Louise Paterson, please visit her website on the page below.